Senator Paterson.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. I find myself again following Senator Bernardi in a debate in the Senate today, and I thank him for raising this important issue. It certainly is a milestone which should not pass without us marking it here in this place and reflecting on it and, as he says, learning the lessons of history. The February 2008 economic stimulus was completely excessive and obviously wasteful. It led to a shocking legacy of debt and deficit, which we are still grappling with today, not to mention the human tragedies that it caused at the time that it took place. $42 billion in size was obscene and, by its very nature, inherently wasteful. It, of course, as Senator Bernardi mentioned, led to cheques being paid to deceased people, school halls going up at campuses around the country, regardless of whether they wanted it or not, or whether it was appropriate for their school or not. Laptops being sent to schools but no support being provided to them to install and service and maintain those laptops. They have long since become technologically obsolete, those laptops, and probably sitting in landfill somewhere, which I know Senator Whish-Wilson will be very disturbed by, and of no use to schools for much more than the 18 months or 2 years that they would have been able to use them for. And of course, most spectacularly, the home insulation debacle, which led to the deaths of several young installers and many house fires. But you don't have to rely on my view that the stimulus package was excessive and wasteful and damaging to Australia, because there are many economists who share that view. And I turned back into the archives to take out an article from The Australian by David Crowe, and I should note he's since moved on to the Sydney Morning Herald and Fairfax, and I congratulate him on his new appointment. But in August 17, 2013, he was writing for The Australian in an article entitled "The Stimulus We Didn't Really Need." And he quotes a number of economists, and I want to share their views for posterity here. Tony Makin, professor at Griffith University, who wrote 3 academic papers on the subject in the years following the stimulus package, it was quoted as saying, "I believe it was unsuccessful and should not be repeated. It sets a precedent that I think is a dangerous one." His view is shared by economics professor John Freeburn at the University of Melbourne, who I was lucky enough to study under when I was an undergraduate student of commerce at Melbourne University. And the article says he advised the Labor government on tax policy last year and says there's no proof that the stimulus saved the economy. Quote, "I would have thought that the exchange rate, China and the flexible labour market did a hell of a lot," he said, while also saying that stimulus played a part. Warwick McKibben from the Australian National University has a similar view. He said, quote, "In case the world fell into a hole, you had to be ready to put more spending out there, but you didn't need to put it out there all at once," he says. He was a Reserve Bank member during the crisis, and he lists a number of factors that he thought played a more important role in helping avoid recession, including some of those that Warwick McKibben referenced. Things such as a financial sector that was in good shape and that was well regulated, Australian dollar which responded to events and fell rapidly, which helped local employers, particularly exporters, which effectively led to a boost in our competitiveness. The Reserve Bank's timely action in aggressively reducing interest rates, which were cut in September 2008, between September 2008 and April 2009, from 7.25% down to 3%. And a number of other factors, of course, including the massive stimulus that occurred in China, which led to an improvement in exports of many Australian products and services to China, but most particularly from the mining industry, which is one of the shining lights during and after the global financial crisis. Of course, it's not just economists who held that view, not just academic economists who held that view and shared that view, but others, including even the Labor Party's own Treasury Secretary, Ken Henry, who, in a number of interviews following the loss of government by the Rudd government in 2013, reflected on his time as Treasury Secretary and reflected on his role in the stimulus package, and particularly in interviews with ABC's Sarah Ferguson, the aptly named Killing Season, looking into the Labor years. He was quoted as saying, "My view at the time, and it remains my view, was that there were too many measures." I think there's no doubt that the stimulus package in February 2008 was too large, was poorly designed, was hastily executed, and it has left us with a budget deficit legacy that we are still tackling today. We are still tackling the embedded decisions that were made in that time. We are not even yet begun the task of paying back the money that was borrowed at that time. We are still just trying to get the budget back into surplus so that we can begin paying that debt down, and it is a legacy that has gone on for too long already. We, of course, in the coalition would have liked to bring the budget back to surplus much sooner than we are forecasting that we will do so, and we've tried very hard towards that goal. But much of the responsibility for our inability to do so, unfortunately, rests with parties in this chamber and decisions that they have made on savings measures proposed by the government. Time after time after time, savings measures put by the government to this chamber, including ones for which we have taken to an election and won a mandate, have been refused. Billions of dollars of spending reductions have been opposed that would have helped the budget get back into shape much earlier than it has, and would have resulted in us beginning to pay down the debt much earlier than we will. Nevertheless, we have made some very real and very welcome progress on this, and I want to spend a moment detailing that. Of course, everyone remembers the record of surpluses under the Howard and Costello government, but the Rudd and Gillard governments increased gross debt during their time in office by an average rate of 33.9% per year. If we'd continued on that same path when we came to office, if we didn't change course in the way we did following 2013, our gross national debt would have reached $1 trillion by now. Thankfully, it's only a little bit more than $500 billion, although that is far more than any of us would like it to be, but at least it has not gone all the way to $1 trillion as it was set to if we had come to office and let the settings stay in place that the Labor government had put there when they lost office. We are on track, as all the budget forecasts have confirmed, including my EFO before Christmas last year, to bring the budget back into balance in the 2020-21 financial year and into surplus thereafter, and that will be the first down payments on that debt that we'll be able to make, and it's a day that couldn't come soon enough. We're projecting that net debt will peak at 19.2% of GDP in 2018-19, an amount which is $11.9 billion lower than the peak estimated just in the budget last year, and it will decline to 7.7% of GDP over the medium term. Gross debt is projected to be $684 billion at the end of the medium term, which is around $40 billion less projected in the budget, but still an eye-wateringly high figure of debt that will be a legacy for future generations to grapple with and pay back if we are not able to make more progress on it in our time in this place. As we know, Labor accumulated $240 billion of deficits in just their 6 years in office, which amounted to 16.9% of GDP. And with much of that spending decisions being baked in the future, when we came to office, we've been able to reduce that, although still deficits of $80 billion have been racked up, although it is 30% less than what Labor was doing. Spending, of course, was rising, again, had we made no changes to the policy settings that we were handed, to 26.5% of GDP by 2023-24. Thankfully, in this financial year, it will only be 25.2% and is projected to fall to 24.9% by 2020-21. But it is still a number of percentage points higher than what were left by the Howard-Costello government, and if we are not able to address that, we are going to inherit permanently higher levels of debt and permanently higher levels of tax, which no Australian should welcome. One of the real achievements of this government, which was noted in the most recent MyEFO, was that real spending growth in this government has averaged only 1.9% over the budget and forward estimates, which is significantly lower than the 4% average that we inherited from Labor. Of course, we're still going to have a cash deficit this financial year. It's expected to be $23.6 billion, again more than any of us on this side of the chamber would like, but we are working on getting that down, and as I said before, projected to turn to surplus in the 2020-21 financial year, which will allow us to start making those payments down. Since the 2017-18 budget, though, because of the good economic news, because of the 400,000 jobs that we created last year, because of the positive developments in our economy, we have been making even more progress than we thought we would, and that's a very encouraging sign, given some of the scepticism sometimes about budget forecasts. At this stage, on the early figures available, it looks like we are ahead of where we'd forecast we would be, and that's a pleasing thing.